Ngozi was a woman who carried herself with grace. As the wife of President Adiwale, she lived in the great mansion in the capital, surrounded by wealth, beauty, and the respect of many. People often said she was blessed, for she had everything any woman could wish for: cars, servants, jewelry, and a powerful husband who loved her. Yet sometimes, deep in her heart, there was an emptiness she could not name. She often looked at children with a soft sadness in her eyes, as if searching for something only she could understand. One bright afternoon, she joined a charity program in the city. The event was meant to feed the poor and provide clothes for those who had nothing. Ngozi loved these events, not just because it made people praise her kindness, but because she truly felt drawn to those who suffered. That day, she walked among the crowd, greeting mothers, patting the heads of children, and handing out food packs. The cameras followed her every move, capturing the image of a president's wife with the poor. But then, something unusual happened. As she turned a corner in the courtyard, she noticed a small girl sitting by herself. The child was not rushing for food, nor laughing with the others. She sat quietly, her thin arms hugging her knees, her clothes torn and faded from time. Her hair was messy, her face pale with hunger. She looked like many other homeless children Ngozi had seen before, yet this girl was different. Her name, the staff whispered, was Z. She had no family, no place to call home. She had been found wandering near the marketplace months ago and had stayed in the charity shelter since then. She was about 12 years old, though her frail body made her look younger. Ngozi stopped walking. Her eyes locked with Z's. The girl lifted her head slowly, and in that moment, Ngozi felt her heart tremble. There was something in those eyes, something deep, familiar, and unexplainable. They were eyes that carried sadness, yes, but also quiet strength. It was as if she had seen them before, in another time, another place. The crowd moved around them. A man offered Ngozi a tray of bottled water, but she waved it away without looking. She was still staring at the child. For reasons she could not understand, she felt a pull in her chest, like a string had been tied between her and the girl long ago, now tugging her closer. Z did not smile. She did not even stretch out her hands for food. Instead, she looked at Ngozi with calm curiosity, as if she too felt the strange connection. Ngozi knelt down slowly, her gown brushing the dusty floor. "What is your name, my dear?" she asked in a soft voice. The girl hesitated, then whispered, Z. Ngozi repeated the name, tasting it carefully. Z, she said again, and the word rolled off her tongue like it belonged to her heart. For a long moment, she simply knelt there, staring at the child. 1,000 thoughts ran through her mind, though none made sense. Why did this girl feel different? Why did looking into her eyes stir something deep inside her, something she had buried for years? A volunteer came quickly, embarrassed. "Madam, this one is quiet. She does not talk much. She has been here for some time." The woman gave a small shrug, as if Ziri were no different from the others. But Ngozi felt otherwise. She gently reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from the girl's face. Ziri did not move away, though she seemed unsure. For the first time in years, Ngozi felt her chest tighten, not from sadness, not from fear, but from a longing she could not name. She stood up slowly, still watching Z, and whispered to herself, "Why does this child feel like mine?" The thought shocked her. It made no sense, yet it refused to leave her heart. That evening, back at the mansion, Ngozi could not eat. Her husband spoke about politics, about meetings and ministers, but her mind wandered back to the thin girl sitting quietly in the corner. She remembered her eyes, the way they pierced straight into her soul. She remembered the strange warmth she had felt, like a hidden door in her heart had been opened. When she lay in bed that night, sleep would not come. She turned again and again, asking herself why that girl had moved her so deeply. Many children had crossed her path before, but never like this one. Zay's face stayed in her mind, her name echoing again and again, until it felt as if she had known her all her life. The next morning, when the sun rose over the capital, Ngozi looked into the mirror as she dressed. She wore her jewels, her silk gown, her crown of respect as the president's wife. Yet beneath it all, she felt bare, restless, and unsettled. She whispered softly, "Zay," as if speaking the name would bring peace. But instead, it filled her with more questions. She could not explain why. She could not explain how. All she knew was that the thin homeless girl had awakened something in her heart that would not go away. And so, for the first time in many years, Ngozi felt that her life, as beautiful as it appeared, was about to change in ways she had never imagined. After the charity event ended, the crowd slowly faded away. The volunteers packed up what was left of the food, and the cameras turned off, but Ngozi's mind remained fixed on the little girl she had seen in the corner. Even as she smiled politely and waved to the people who called her name, her heart kept drifting back to Zeri. When the cars were ready to take her home, Ngozi turned to one of the women in charge of the shelter. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharpness in her eyes. "That girl, the quiet one sitting alone. What is her story?" The woman looked puzzled. "Which girl, madam?" "The one with the big eyes," Ngozi said softly, "the one they call Zeri." The woman's expression softened. She sighed and shook her head. "Ah, that child. She was abandoned as a baby. Nobody knows her true parents. People say she was found near the river years ago, left with nothing but a piece of cloth. Since then, she has lived on the streets. Sometimes market women give her food. Sometimes she sleeps under stalls. When she was brought here, she refused to speak for many days. She is quiet, but she survives. That's all we know." The words pierced Ngozi's heart like arrows. Abandoned as a baby. Left with nothing. Survived on scraps. She stood frozen, her mind swirling with questions. She wanted to ask more, but something held her back. Her voice caught in her throat, so she simply nodded, thanked the woman, and entered her car. The drive back to the presidential mansion felt unusually long. Outside the windows, the city lights glowed, cars honked, and people rushed along the busy streets. Yet all Ngozi could see was the small figure of Zeri sitting alone, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes staring quietly as if carrying the secrets of the world. When she arrived home, servants rushed to greet her. Dinner was served in the grand hall, filled with rich aromas and golden light from the chandeliers. President Adewale was already at the table, speaking about the day's political matters. He looked up at his wife with a smile, but she barely noticed. She sat down, lifted her spoon, and lowered it again without eating. Her mind was elsewhere. Throughout the evening, Adewale spoke of meetings, governors, and plans for the coming election. Ngozi nodded politely, but she heard almost nothing. She kept remembering the staff's words, abandoned as a baby, nobody knows her true parents. Later, when the house was quiet and she lay in the wide bed beside her husband, sleep refused to come. She turned to the left, then to the right. Every time she closed her eyes, Zeri's face appeared. The child's eyes followed her into the dark, questioning her, pulling at her heart. Ngozi sat up, pressing her hand to her chest. Why did this girl feel so familiar? Why did her face stir something buried deep inside? She remembered her own past, the years before the mansion, before the title of First Lady. There had been a time when her life was not perfect. A time of mistakes, pain, and secrets she rarely allowed herself to think about. She whispered into the silence, "Could it be?" Then shook her head quickly. No, it was impossible. She was only imagining things. Still, the thought refused to leave her. The next morning, while the staff prepared her day's schedule, Ngozi sat by the window, sipping tea that had gone cold. She hardly tasted it. She asked her secretary, "That girl, do we know how old she is?" The secretary flipped through notes and replied, "They believe she is about 12, madam. But no one knows for certain." 12, Ngozi repeated softly. Her hand trembled as she placed the teacup back on the table. A wave of emotion rose inside her, so strong she had to excuse herself from the room. All day, she tried to focus on her duties, but nothing worked. She smiled at the cameras, shook hands with visitors, and gave speeches, but Zeri's eyes never left her mind. At one point, she stood before a large crowd, but instead of seeing the faces of the people, she saw only the quiet girl in the charity home, sitting in the corner with her knees drawn to her chest. That night was no better. Again, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her husband slept soundly beside her, but her heart beat restlessly. Questions circled in her mind, heavy and insistent. Who was Zeri? Why did her presence feel like a mirror to her soul? She remembered something from long ago, a memory she had buried under layers of silence. Tears welled in her eyes. She tried to push the thought away, but it kept coming back stronger, whispering in her ear. By the third day, Ngozi could no longer resist. She asked her driver to take her back to the shelter, but this time without any camera crew, without any public announcement. She dressed simply, without jewelry, her head covered with a scarf so she would not draw attention. When she arrived, her eyes searched quickly, and there she was, Zeri, sitting again in her corner. This time, the girl was playing quietly with a small stone, drawing shapes in the dust. Ngozi's heart ached as she watched. She felt the same pull again, stronger now, impossible to ignore. She whispered to herself, "Why do I feel as if I know her?" Her curiosity had grown into something deeper, something fierce. She needed answers. She needed to know the truth. And so, though she did not yet understand what destiny had placed before her, Ngozi made a silent promise in her heart. She would not rest until she discovered who Z really was, and why the child felt so much like a piece of her own soul. Ngozi kept returning to the shelter, not as the president's wife, but as a woman whose heart was restless. Each time she stepped into the simple compound, her eyes went straight to Z. The girl always sat quietly, sometimes helping smaller children, sometimes just staring at the ground as though she carried more thoughts than her young age should hold. At first, Z was shy around Ngozi. She would lower her head and answer only with short words when spoken to. But Ngozi was patient. She sat with her, sometimes in silence, sometimes offering food, sometimes asking gentle questions. Slowly, Z began to open up. She spoke of nights she had slept under market stalls, of the days she went hungry, of the times she had to fight bigger children for scraps. As Ngozi listened, her heart ached. This was not just pity, it was something deeper, something she could not name. She found herself looking forward to each visit, waiting to hear Zay's soft voice. Every story the girl told tied another thread around Ngozi's heart, pulling her closer. One day, the two of them sat outside under a tree. The sun was warm, and the air smelled of dust and roasted corn from a nearby vendor. Zay was telling her about a night when rain had fallen heavily, and she had hidden under a broken cart to stay dry. As she spoke, her sleeve slipped down, revealing a small mark on her upper arm. Ngozi's eyes froze. The world around her seemed to go silent. She leaned closer without meaning to, staring at the mark. It was a birthmark, dark and shaped almost like a small leaf. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that mark. She had seen it once, long ago, in a hospital room filled with sorrow. It had been on the arm of the baby she had held for only a short while, the baby she was told had not survived. Her lost child. Her hands trembled, and she pulled them into her lap quickly, trying not to alarm the girl. But her heart was beating fast, pounding against her chest like a drum. Could it be? Could this girl sitting before her be the child she had lost? Z noticed her silence and looked up. "Madam, are you okay?" she asked softly. Ngozi forced a smile, though her voice shook. "Yes, my dear. I am fine. Please, continue your story." But she heard nothing more of the tale. Her mind was racing. Images from the past returned to her, the long hours of labor, the cries, the exhaustion, and then the nurses whispering that the baby was gone. She remembered the crushing grief that had followed, the way she and Adiwale had wept together, and the silence they had built around that memory ever since. Now, here in front of her, sat a girl with the same birthmark. A girl about the same age the lost child would have been. Ngozi's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away before Zay could see. Her thoughts whirled like a storm. Could the hospital have made a mistake? Could her child have been abandoned instead of buried? And if so, how had Z ended up here, living as a nameless homeless girl? Over the next days, Ngozi watched Z even more closely. Every small detail, the shape of her face, the way she tilted her head, the softness of her smile, brought back memories. She began to notice similarities between Z and herself, even between Z and Adiwale. The thought both frightened and thrilled her. She began to ask the staff quiet questions. Where exactly was she found? Who brought her here? Is there any record, any clue of her past? But the answers were always vague. The staff only knew she had been picked up by the authorities when she was very small, with no family, no name, no history. Ngozi's nights became heavier. She tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling while her husband slept beside her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the birthmark again. Her heart whispered one thing over and over: "She is yours." One evening, she sat in her private sitting room, holding an old photo album. Inside were only a few pictures from the time before her loss. One picture in particular showed her holding the small baby, the blanket pulled just enough to show the little arm. And there, clear in the faded photo, was the same mark. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she traced the picture with her finger. She wanted to tell Adiwale, but fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if she gave him hope only to take it away again? What if the truth was too painful to face? Still, the bond between her and Z grew stronger. The girl began to smile more when Ngozi came. She would wait by the gate, her eyes lighting up when the tall figure of the First Lady appeared. One day, she even took Ngozi's hand in hers, shyly but firmly. That simple touch melted Ngozi's heart. As they sat together under the same tree where she had first seen the birthmark, Ngozi whispered to herself, "This cannot be a mistake." she is mine. But the truth was still hidden in shadows. There were questions that had no answers yet, mysteries wrapped in pain and silence. And though fear pressed against her, Ngozi knew she could not stop now. The bond she felt was more than chance, more than kindness. It was blood calling to blood, a mother's heart recognizing her child. And deep inside, she knew that life was about to change, for herself, for Zei, and for everyone around them. Ngozi could no longer bear the weight of her thoughts. Each time she looked at Zei, her heart screamed louder. The mark on the girl's arm, the shape of her eyes, the bond she felt, it was too much to ignore. She had lived many years in control of her emotions, always presenting herself as strong, calm, and graceful in front of the nation. But this time, she could not pretend. She needed the truth. Quietly, without telling anyone, she made arrangements. A trusted doctor, one who had been with her family for years, agreed to help. Late one evening, when the shelter was quiet and the children were asleep, she asked Zei to come with her. The girl followed, unsure but willing, because she trusted Ngozi. The test was done in private. Zei did not fully understand what was happening, but she saw Ngozi's serious face and decided not to ask too many questions. When it was over, Ngozi kissed her forehead and told her softly, "Do not worry, my dear. This is just something important I need to do." The waiting felt like an eternity. Each hour was heavy, filled with memories and fears. Ngozi thought of the past again, the night in the hospital, the voices of the nurses, the silence in her arms. She had buried that pain so deeply that she had almost forgotten how raw it felt. Now it was alive again, sharper than ever. Finally, the results came. She sat in her private room, the envelope resting in her hands. Her palms were wet, and her heart pounded so hard she could hear it. Slowly, she opened it. She read the words once. Then again. And again. Her eyes blurred with tears. She pressed her hand to her mouth to stop the sob that threatened to escape. The truth was clear. Zei was hers. The daughter she thought she had lost forever was alive, sitting in a shelter, waiting for her. Ngozi wept openly, her tears falling onto the paper. The years of grief, the years of emptiness, broke like a dam. She had lived with the pain of believing her child was gone, and now, here she was, alive and real. The mix of joy and sorrow was too much for her to contain. That evening, she returned to the shelter. Zei came running, as she always did, her smile wide, her small hands reaching out. But when she saw Ngozi's tearful face, her smile faded into worry. "Madam, what is wrong?" she asked softly. Ngozi dropped to her knees and pulled Zei into her arms. She held her so tightly, as though afraid someone would take her away again. Her body shook with sobs, but she whispered through her tears, "I will never leave you again. Never." Zei froze at first, surprised by the sudden embrace. She had grown up without a mother's love, without anyone holding her this way. Slowly, she relaxed into the warmth. Her thin arms wrapped around Ngozi's shoulders, and for the first time, she felt the comfort of belonging. "You are my daughter," Ngozi whispered, her voice trembling. "My own blood. The one I lost, the one I thought was gone. But God has given you back to me." Zei's eyes widened. She pulled back a little to look into Ngozi's tear-streaked face. "Your daughter?" she asked in disbelief. "Yes, my daughter," Ngozi said firmly, holding her cheeks. "You are mine. You were always mine." Zei did not know what to say. Her whole life had been a story of rejection, hunger, and loneliness. Now, the most powerful woman in the country was telling her she belonged. Her chest felt warm, and her eyes filled with tears she had never cried before. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. For the first time, she felt loved. Ngozi stayed there, rocking her gently as if trying to make up for all the lost years. The shelter staff watched in silence, their mouths open, too stunned to move. None of them could believe what they were seeing, the first lady of the nation holding a homeless girl like her dearest treasure. That night, Ngozi took Zei home. She gave her new clothes, a warm bed, and food she had never tasted before. But more than all of that, she gave her love. She sat by her bed until the girl fell asleep, holding her hand as if afraid she might vanish again. When Zei finally closed her eyes, Ngozi whispered, "Sleep well, my daughter. You will never be alone again." The truth had changed everything. The woman who had once lived with silent grief now had her joy restored. The girl who had once lived without a family now had a mother's arms around her. And in that quiet room, filled with the soft breathing of a sleeping child, a new story began, the story of a mother and daughter reunited by fate, bound forever by love. The news spread faster than anyone could imagine. Newspapers carried the headline, President's wife finds long-lost daughter among the homeless. Radio stations spoke about it. Television programs replayed the moment Ngozi embraced Zeri in the shelter. The city buzzed with shock and curiosity. Some people doubted the story. Some whispered it was too strange to be true. Others simply marveled at the turn of fate. But Ngozi did not care about gossip or speculation. For her, nothing else mattered except the girl now sleeping peacefully in her home. Each morning, she walked into Zay's room just to make sure it was real. Every time she saw her daughter's face, she felt her heart swell with gratitude. She had lost her once, but never again. President Adewale, too, was moved. At first, he struggled to accept how such a twist of fate had remained hidden for so long. But when he saw Zay's gentle spirit, her shy smile, and the bond she already shared with his wife, his doubts faded. He reached out to her, slowly at first, then warmly, calling her my daughter. Zay's life changed in ways she had never imagined. The girl who once fought for scraps of food now ate at a table where she was served with dignity. The girl who once slept on cold floors now rested in a bed softer than clouds. But what touched her most was not the comfort of wealth, it was the love. Ngozi never let her feel alone. Adewale treated her like part of the family. For the first time in her life, Z knew what it meant to belong. Yet, Ngozi and Adewale understood something important. Their reunion was not just about their happiness. They could not ignore the many other children who were still out there, living the life Z had once endured. They decided to act. Together, they launched a new program under the First Lady's foundation. It was called the Home of Hope. Its mission was simple: to give shelter, education, and care to homeless children across the country. Buildings were set up in different towns. Doctors, teachers, and caregivers were recruited. Street children who once had no names in society were now given food, books, and a chance at life. When the project was announced, people across the land were stunned again. Many had expected Ngozi to hide the story out of shame or fear of scandal. But she stood boldly before the cameras, Zay by her side, and said, "Finding my daughter taught me the greatest lesson of my life, that love is the true wealth, not money, not power, not titles. Every child deserves to be loved, no matter where they come from." Her words touched millions. Parents cried as they watched the speech on television. Homeless children on the streets whispered her name with hope. And in the quiet of her heart, Zay smiled, proud that her story had become a light for others. Life slowly adjusted for Zay. Though she was still shy, she worked hard to learn. Tutors came to help her catch up in school. She studied with determination, grateful for every opportunity. She also spent time visiting the shelters that were part of the foundation. Each time she walked into those places, children ran to her, calling her sister. They trusted her because she understood their pain. She had lived it. Ngozi often stood back and watched her daughter speak with the children. She marveled at how easily Zay's kindness flowed, how her words carried comfort. Sometimes she wondered if God had allowed them to be apart for those years so that Zay could grow into this strong and compassionate girl. The city that had once gossiped now admired. People began to see Ngozi not just as the president's elegant wife, but as a mother who had opened her heart to the forgotten ones. They saw Zay not as a homeless child rescued by luck, but as a young woman with a story that inspired hope. But inside their home, life was simple. They laughed together at meals. They prayed together before bed. Ngozi read to Zay, and Adewale listened to her dreams for the future. These small moments mattered more than the cameras, the speeches, or the headlines. They were a family again, whole at last. One evening, as they sat in the garden, Zay looked at her mother and asked, "Mama, why do you love me so much, even though we were apart for so long?" Ngozi smiled, pulling her close. "Because you are my child. Blood can never be erased by time. And even if I had not found you, my heart would still be searching for you." Zay leaned against her, her eyes glistening. She whispered, "Then I will never leave you either." That night, as Ngozi lay in bed, she thought about everything, her pain, her search, the miracle of reunion. She realized something deeper. Her story with Zay was not only about finding what was lost. It was about being reminded of what truly mattered in life. She had wealth, she had power, but none of it compared to the gift of love. The city continued to talk, but she no longer cared. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. All that mattered was that her daughter was safe, her family was whole, and other children were being saved too. From then on, whenever she spoke at events or met with leaders, she carried Zay's story in her heart. She always ended with the same words, "Finding Zay taught me that love is the greatest wealth. And now, it is my duty to share that wealth with the world." And so, from the pain of loss came the joy of reunion. From the sorrow of the past came a future full of hope. And from the heart of one little homeless girl came a movement that touched an entire nation. It was not just a new beginning for Ngozi and Zay. It was a new beginning for many children across the land.